Good evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 1 of the Scottish Whisky Show. We're delighted that you're able to join us this evening. Now, we've decided to run this episode as part of Independence Live's Food Sovereignty Week because whisky is such a huge part of the food and drink sector, not only in Scotland but in the UK. Now, you may be aware that whisky is the largest food and drink export in the United Kingdom. Now, last year it was 4.9 billion the industry was valued at. This year, it's fallen, obviously, going to COVID and possibly Brexit, to 3.9 billion. But it's still massive. And the next product within the food and drink sector is chocolate, which is less than 800 million this year. So it's a hugely important economic industry for Scotland and the United Kingdom. But of course, it's hugely culturally important as well. And that's what we're going to cover in the Scottish Whisky Show. So before we get going, I'd love to hear what you're having if you're taking a little dram while you're watching this. I've gone for Auchentashon 3 Wood, which is one of my favourite lower end price whiskies. I'm just having a little glass now. I really like this. I'd love to know what you're having and also what your favourite whiskey is. So this evening, the first thing we've got for you is a very short welcome from Jackie Kay, the former maker, and she says a wonderful poem, and she links poetry and whiskey together because, as I said, whiskey is hugely important in Scotland's culture. And then next we have an interview with Steven Kersley, who is the head distiller at BrewDog. Now, I'm sure you all know BrewDog from the beer that he brews, but it's recently gone into white spirits and also whiskey. And Steven talks about the whole maturation process of whiskey. It's a fascinating 25 minutes. I hope you enjoy it. So thanks very much for tuning in to what will hopefully be your monthly show, the Scottish Whisky Show. Enjoy this evening. Enjoy a little drama if you have one. And I'm sure you're going to enjoy spending a little bit of time with Jackie Kay and also Steven Kersley.
My very own malt that I can raise a toast with. It's been an extraordinary year for me, and this was malt called the Macker's Malt, and it was made by the Rassay Distillery. It was exciting because I got a chance to choose and to taste all of these different whiskies to put together my very own malt. So I mean, it was just really great. Can you imagine having that as part of your day job? Oh yes, very tasty. Mm. So it was great fun. But the world of whiskey and the world of poetry are really kind of compatible worlds. They go together very, very, very well. There's a lot of kind of alchemy in that relationship between whiskey and poetry, and that's why I wanted to work with Rassay Distillery. And they produced this really, really beautiful bottle. Just don't know if you can see it, but you will in a bit. Beautiful bottle, and I wrote a poem especially to go on the bottle, the label. So I'm going to read you this poem now. And I wrote this poem. I wrote 3 different versions of this poem, and I read them all to my mum, and she picked this one that she liked the best. And now, sadly, my mum has died, and it feels like this is a poem to her. Here's to you. I raise my glass, my dear, wherever you now are, north, south, east, or west, under the nearest or furthest star. There's love in this wee dram, in the purest form, to greet you, my fear, my Joe, nippy, heathery, warm, Slangiva. I hope you have a good toast to those that you love that are here and to those that you love that are not here. Cheers. Slangiva. It's really fantastic. I've got to say it. And the terribly sad news is that you just can't get it because they sold within 10 minutes. It was launched on International Women's Day and they were gone within 10 minutes of it being announced. So, but you can be jealous. We like to be jealous in the world of whiskey.
Thanks so much for joining us for this session. And I'd just like to introduce you to our audience as Steven Kersley, MD of BrewDog Distilling Company.
Absolute pleasure, William. Great to be here and excited to have a chat with you today about all things BrewDog Distilling Co. Whisky.
Fantastic. Well, BrewDog's now well known globally for the beer that it produces. So what made BrewDog decide to go into the whiskey distilling business?
It's a good question. I think, for when I joined back in 2015, I came from Diageo. I was a distillery manager with them for a number of years. Why I was, so enthused by what BrewDog were looking to achieve within whiskey was why I joined. We've got two very, very kind of ambitious co-founders, in Martin and James, and their love of beer transcends into whiskey, and they are super passionate about bringing the same sort of energy, the same sort of ambition to whiskey Scotch as they have in beer. And I think I think Scotch whiskey as a category is ripe for that sort of energy, that sort of slight irreverence, boldness, but fundamentally, BrewDog puts quality at the heart of absolutely everything it does, and for us, that's something we're really excited about showcasing in the future when it comes to us putting our Scotch whisky into a bottle.
Well, that's really interesting. Did it feel like a really natural jump from craft beer to craft whiskey?
It did, and a big part of the reason for that is the distillery is flanked by two absolutely world-class brew houses. So, I don't need to kind of teach a guy to suck eggs here. Everybody who's on this session will know the process of making whiskey, but it starts with grain, as does beer. You add water, you add yeast. The only difference being is that the beer typically will have hops in it. We don't obviously add hops for making whiskey, but the process by which we get to wort and then we ferment are they're identical. There's some nuances with beer, which is much more technical. I think if you look at how whiskey is made from the upstream of the still house through mashing and fermentation, there's varying different ways in which you can extract the sugars to turn into alcohol. But I always find that whiskey is a slightly cruder, a little bit more rougher way of making a kind of wash or a fermentation of beer than obviously a brewery would do, because they stop at wash. It has to taste amazing. Whiskey wash is all about getting as much sugar, or is about getting as much sugar out of the malt barley as possible. So that's great for me though, because having a brewery which is slightly more technically minded has a few more gadgets on the equipment to control the parameters in a lot more of a tighter way. A good example would be fermentation. So we propagate our yeast up, which is typically we typically use ale yeast to ferment our wash when we're making whiskey, but we can control the fermentation a lot better. So we can control the temperature, we can control the pressure within that fermentation. We won't get too technical, but what it allows us to do is actually manipulate the flavour that is being created during the fermentation process, because a lot of the flavour in whiskey originates from the sugar that the yeast is interacting with, and through ester formations, through different variations of alcohol, grades of alcohol that are being made during that fermentation process, all contribute to the final flavour that is in your glass. So if we can control that, then we can manipulate the flavour to suit the flavour that we want to create.
In terms of the kind of ethos of BrewDog, and we're kind of deciding, are we calling this indie or are we calling it craft when we're looking at these new distillers? But I would say that BrewDog's known as an indie and as a craft beer and organisation. And has that ethos come across to the distilling?
100%. I mean, I think it's something that we've probably toiled with over the last few years internally. How do you define craft now? Because it feels like it's been slightly hijacked by marketeers of this world to kind of mean small batch. But like where I kind of ground myself when it comes to that word is in the quality of the liquid. And BrewDog, that is a thread that runs through the whole business. From, we could be brewing in our Columbus brew house in America, our Brisbane brew house in Australia, or here in Ellen. The commonality is that each of us are striving to make the best possible liquid, and that is 100% transferred onto the distilling side as well. And it's really interesting if you look at what we've done with regards to, I suppose, research before we kind of started laying down a kind of recipe or recipes, if you like, into cask. We toiled a lot with the different yeast strains that we were going to, or the yeast strain that we were going to use to ferment the sugar. We looked at the fermentation profile, what temperature, what pressure. We looked at the still house. Should it be double pot distilled? Should we have high reflux, low reflux? So many parameters, and you could easily go down a rabbit hole and spend a lot of time not doing anything, actually just researching. So you have to make the decisions ultimately, but we didn't hold back on making sure that we were exploring the kind of realms of flavour as much as possible. And one of the cool kind of experiments that we did was actually we used red wine yeast in conjunction with distiller's yeast to ferment one of our batches. It was, for anybody who says that these little nuances don't have an impact on flavour, I just don't. It frustrates me actually, because I don't buy it in the slightest. Two washes that were made from exactly the same raw material, same barley, same batch of barley, everything was the same, apart from the fact that we added red wine yeast into one, distiller's yeast into the other. Flavour wise, the wash was so different. So as you would expect,
completely different profile.
Massive. So as you would expect, red wine, big, kind of bold stone fruit flavours. There was a bit of tropical flavours in there. Obviously the malt, that malty, biscuity, grainy aroma that comes through just because of the fact that you're using barley. But then you looked at the distiller's yeast. Distiller's yeast is very happy in kind of what we would call uncomfortable conditions. So it's hot. It's in high alcohol or high ABV, and it's what I would probably call stressed. So it's producing a lot of different flavours due to the environment that it's in. We distilled them both, 2 different unique spirits.
But that leads nicely into that maturation profile and environment, that what I know is different with you. So how is that different?
Yeah, so I think to sum up our ethos, that we do believe that, I guess, being custodians of the liquid's creation at every stage is super important. One, because I think if you have control, you can make changes, or you can play tunes to create and influence flavour. But secondly, I think there's an element where, as a distiller, first and foremost, I'm curious to understand how certain environments and certain ingredients, perhaps, or certain parts of the process can actually manipulate the flavour of the final product. So our warehouse is fully temperature and fully humidity controlled. So it's essentially a climate controlled warehouse. It is extremely humid at the moment, and it's extremely hot. It's about 32
which is not what it's
Celsius.
like outside.
No, the temperature differential from inside to outside is unbelievable. We obviously into spring now, kind of. The weather up
Technically speaking.
Yeah. But the distillers, their favourite role or favourite job was in the winter is to get into the warehouse and take samples, because it's the warmest place in Scotland. So that humidity is up at around about 70% at the moment. So it's like walking into a tropical rainforest. That sort of heat that just sticks to you. It's really clammy. You don't want to spend too much time in there, just because you do start to feel the effects of it. It's like really warm, and obviously in a warm environment where you've got casks maturing whiskey, you're going to get a lot of evaporation of spirit. Now, the kind of hypothesis or the trial that we're working out at the moment is, what does that do to the spirit's maturation profile? And a lot of people use the term peak maturation. When does the the kind of spirit hit the peak of the curve in terms of how it tastes. So we're trying to understand where that peak is and how does the environment in which the casks are maturing impact that. So what we found is that the whiskey at 2.5 years, 3 years old is tasting really quite good. Wouldn't say that it's finished product or finished article, but it's certainly on a good trajectory. And the other bit is as well is like, well, if we can play tunes with the environment in which the casks are maturing in, then we've actually done something quite groundbreaking in the sense that we've actually potentially done something for the betterment of Scotch whisky, in the sense that it's moved the needle a little bit and challenged perhaps the traditional way of thinking, where it needs to be a dunnage warehouse, only 3 high stone walls, and that's not throwing any shade on that sort of that maturation style. But I, as a distiller, my job as a distiller is to try and understand how I can create flavour, and having the environment. It's a bit like playing God with the weather in terms of whiskey, and being able to just tweak, fine tune the environment to suit the style of whiskey that you're making. It's quite interesting.
No, it's fascinating thinking there's only 3 ingredients, but there's so many things that you can manipulate to make those 3 ingredients taste completely different. It's incredible. So you're looking at the single malts, but I also think that you're able to do different styles of whiskey as well, aren't you?
The whole distillery was designed to be multifaceted, in that because we also make a lot of white spirits from scratch as well, we had to create an eclectic still house which could handle any style from rum to vodka to gin to whiskey. The benefit of having that is that we can actually make many different styles of whiskey. And I mentioned before, we've got an absolutely world-class brew house next door to us that can handle barley, but also can play tunes with rye, corn if we wanted to, or maize, wheat. And we use a lot of wheat in our vodka. So that takes you into the realms of grain whiskey production, which is not typically done on a small indie craft scale. In Scotland, it's very much led by 3 big distilleries, most of them in the central belt of Scotland, which churn out millions of litres a year to support the blended Scotch whisky category. But on a small batch scale, there's flavour to be found there on a big way. So, grain whiskey taken up to just below 94% ABV, so you're stripping out a lot of flavour, which is obviously desirable because you want it to taste, for the blended category, taste good at a younger age. So the less imperfections there, the better. But actually treat it like a double pot distillation. So taking a rye mash with barley and maybe a bit of wheat in there, double pot distill that, then you've suddenly got a Scotch grain distillery, Scotch grain whiskey, which has been distilled like a single malt. And this isn't groundbreaking stuff, obviously. I mean, you look around the world, there's lots of other distilleries, specifically in America, that do this as their bread and butter. And there's then just segueing a little bit into the American styles of spirit. Bourbon obviously made in Kentucky. That's where bourbon originated. It's where it comes from. It's a very American whiskey, but there's nothing to say that as we've got a bit of latitude to play with grain, that you could use the exact same sort of styles of recipe that they use in Kentucky to distill in Scotland. So you could in effect make your own quote-unquote bourbon, a Scotch bourbon. You could obviously call it bourbon, but it would be in that sort of realms of the flavour profile. And we've got the capability to do that in our still house. So that's just incredibly exciting for us.
So there's so much potential for you to make those spirits. So what can we expect in the next couple of years in terms of like your first batch? What we're going to be able to see, smell, and of course taste?
So the majority of the stuff that we've got currently is quite a vast array. We have been laying down different new makes, so 5-6 recipes across different casks, predominantly ex-bourbon, but a lot of sherry as well, some ex wine casks that have been regenerated, a few port pipes as well. So it's quite interesting. The answer to that is I'm not sure because we do have so much going on in the warehouse that our approach will be to launch small batches of stuff that we love. So it won't be, I guess, a sustained liquid, which will have the same profile each time. We'll do, maybe 3 or 4 releases a year, but it'll be something that is slightly different each time, which is really exciting. At least till the point where we can actually put a significant volume down. As I mentioned earlier, the still house is multifaceted. It's a big advantage that we have, but it also has its I guess, weaknesses in the sense that when our vodka and gin sales are climbing and doing really well, and we're growing that side of our business, our actual capacity to make whiskey reduces. So we need to solve that, and we're going to do that later this year.
In terms of the timing, when are we likely to see those first batches?
So Head says that will be probably a couple of years from now. If I'm being honest, we are in a position where we're constantly monitoring, constantly tasting, and I might be wrong. It might be sooner than that, but we're just understanding I guess going back to that peak. When is the maturation peak going to be for our whiskey? And some of the stuff that we've got in cask is showing great promise. We're really excited about it, but I don't feel that it's at that peak yet. So it'll take a little bit more time, but certainly between 18 to 24 months, we might be in the realms of talking again, but with a glass in our hand.
Well, something to look forward to. What I'd like to do is just kind of cast your mind back to the last kind of 16 months. And we're really kind of talking about the pandemic. How did that affect BrewDog, the distillery, and also you personally? Because obviously, there was kind of seismic shockwaves sent right across the whiskey industry.
Yeah, it was so hard. It was so tough. I mean, I remember probably a week into the sort of, we all had that sort of preamble towards it being as serious as it became. So it kind of felt like it was a bit of a slow tidal wave that was coming towards the UK. And then when it hit, I don't think anybody quite expected it to be as bad as it was. And I remember the first morning when it was very apparent how serious this was going to be. We kind of had just a kind of all hands meeting within the kind of confines of the brew house, the distillery, and the whole business, the whole building was there, and we were listening to James Watt, our CEO and co-founder, explain to us that there might not be a business in a few months' time. So it was very serious for us. We weren't sure exactly how to get out of it. I think what we did, what that did, kind of showcase that whole the whole pandemic was what makes this business great. No one was going to give us a roadmap. No one's going to give anybody a roadmap out of COVID-19. But we were determined, each one of us, to kind of give ourselves the best fighting opportunity to kind of come through the other side of it. In the distillery, we realised that, well, as most or everybody did, that one of our biggest routes to market, one of our biggest channels, the on-trade, had just closed overnight. And the beer side felt that extremely hard. More so than obviously the distillery. Coming out of the first lockdown, our focus was purely on new product development, actually. So we had the kind of realization that the grocery side of our business was going to sustain us for as long as I think the pandemic lasted. So what we focused on was getting our R&D and new product development business side of the business really motor. We dived into a lot of whiskey, a lot of rum development, a lot of gin, a lot of vodka development as well. Did a lot of gin, was brilliant actually. But whiskey was one where we focused hard. And I think what will be interesting in 3, 4, 5 years' time is to just revisit that and explore the fruits of the labour. Because we obviously couldn't do anything. We couldn't go out. Like, we came to our work and went home again. And for me, at least, spending a lot of time with the team I was very lucky. I mean, a lot of people, maybe yourself, were kind of stuck indoors by yourself. A lot of people were. So coming into the team and coming into the building and the distillery and being able to interact with the team and talk shop on whiskey, talk shop on rum, it was just great. And that kept us going, to be honest with you. Kept me going. The kind of the daily interactions with the team were so vital to all of our mental health and also we've done a lot of great work, which is going to hopefully come to fruition and put this small business in even a stronger position in the years to come.
That's fascinating, but that's proper indie and craft, isn't it? Just coping with what you've got and trying to make the most out of it, and turning a very difficult situation into as positive a situation as you can get. That's kind of the indie ethos. I'd really like to finish with talking about the distillery.
So currently our capacity is maxed. We can't make any more vodka or gin, and right now our whiskey making capacity is a big fat zero, because we have I would often say that we're a whiskey distillery with a serious gin problem, because we can't stop making it.
Yeah, of course.
So where we're at right now is in the midst of relocation to another building on the BrewDog campus, but it's much better suited to our needs and will sustain us through future years of growth. So we are currently we're in the corner of our warehouse, one of the biggest warehouse we've got on site, with beer all around us, and we've got no room. So the idea is that we will find ourselves in a new home. We will expand the capacity of the distillery in that new home by adding a new still. Currently, we have 2 3,000 litre pot stills, which are used to make rum and whiskey. We're going to add a 10,000 litre pot still, which is obviously just over 3 times the size of our biggest still currently. And that will game change our ability to lay down serious volume in 2021, second half of the year and beyond. So the way that we've designed this still, if you go and if you've seen it, our still house, if you go and have a look at it through maybe our Instagram page or Twitter page, you'll be able to see that on the left-hand side of that photograph, there is a triple bubble still. This has got 3 chambers of basically they're bubbles within the neck of the still. Massive area for interaction, spirit, and for spirit interaction with the copper. Gives us a super clean spirit. That is exactly the same design as we're applying to the 10,000 litre still. So it's going to be a bigger one of those, basically. We've also, adjacent to that pot still, we've got a 8-plate rectification column, and that can be engaged. We don't have to use it, but if we were making styles of spirit, which we talked about earlier, which are much more grain focused as a style, so those sorts of cereals like your rye, your wheats, your maize, if we were to make a whiskey in that style, then we would engage that column. But that will allow us to lay down circa 4,500 casks a year, which is significant volume.
That is a game changer for you then, is it? And I can see how excited you are about that thought, just free talking about it.
It's absolutely brilliant news.
So Stephen, thanks so much for spending some time and sharing your story and the story of BrewDog Distilling Company with us. Thanks very much.
Pleasure. Thanks, William. Cheers.
Wasn't that great? I hope you enjoyed that 30 minutes with Jackie and Stephen. When I was speaking to him, I learned so much about this process of making whiskey, and it was amazing to see his enthusiasm for the spirit that Brewdog are going to produce. I've had a little bit of this through the half hour. I hope you've enjoyed a whiskey or anything you've been drinking. Enjoy the weekend, and we'll see you next month for episode 2 of the Scottish Whisky Show. Thanks so much for joining us. Bye for now.